Thanks for joining us today for Taste of Techstars Sustainability. This session is around leadership. And before we get started, just if it's your first time attending, Techstars Sustainability Accelerator is part of a larger organization, Techstars, which is the worldwide network to help entrepreneurs succeed. We run about 50 accelerators around the world and invest up to 120K in the companies we work with, and provide resources like mentorship, connections, network, a lot of leadership skills that we'll go over some today. And most importantly, we work with our partner, the Nature Conservancy. And so TNC is the world's largest nonprofit in the environmental space. And together, we are working with technology startups to create a more sustainable world where humans and nature can thrive together. So we're focused on using natural-based solutions for climate change, providing sustainable food and water, and greening our cities. Happy to chat more about that anytime. And see if we can. So with that, we'll jump into our content. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat anytime in between what we're working on. And today we're really gonna you're going to learn a lot of different tips that you can start applying later today around a lot of kind of short examples that work. Honestly, this is obviously focused for startups and companies, but I use these in my personal relationships and across my life so that we can be helpful to what you're working on in the world. So the first place I want to start with is, where are you? And I'm at my house. Most of us hopefully are at home these days, but this isn't around where you are physically. Really, where are you emotionally? Where are your colleagues right now interacting with? And understanding that is the first part we're going to talk about. A great tool for this, oops, I need to switch my screen here, is a really simple one developed by one of our leadership coaches that mentors with a program, Sam. And it's just a red, yellow, green check-in. Zach and I start these every week. We have our weekly ops review meeting, and first thing on the agenda. And basically, it's asking, how are you emotionally? Where you're at? And you can say the colors, red, yellow, green. The colors don't work for everyone. Maybe there are different colors for you. This is just kind of a place to start. Sometimes I'm green with red polka dots, or red with a green stripe. You can get creative here. But the idea is to create an accessible way to check in that for some might be kind of harder to check in emotionally. And it's kind of trying to normalize talking about emotions and feelings in the workplace. So red is kind of a state of, like, I'm not good. If someone's red in a meeting, often it might be a good time to think about, is now the best time to have that meeting? It's really kind of a state of that you could be in fight, flight, or freeze and really not available. Your kind of whole system might be shutting down. Yellow is still kind of a reactionary area, but you're there. You're like, okay, I'm at work. I understand. Like you're kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Whereas red, you're kind of like totally checked out. And green, you're feeling safe. You might be open, kind of playful, flow. So starting with check-in. So if I were to check in right now, I think in this moment, I'm pretty green actually. And that's another thing. I might, by the end of this call, I might be red. We're kind of constantly changing, locating yourself of like, where am I? And then going a layer deeper. So this can be the start of every one-on-one. We suggest using this to start of any kind of like weekly team meeting. It might not be appropriate to get an investor meeting and be like, all right, let's do a red, yellow, green check-in, unless it's like your investor and you've been working with them and everything. We do it with all our one-on-ones with our companies. So those are some kind of areas you could use it. You could do it with your kids in the morning. Hey, let's check in. Where are we? A lot of opportunities there. And then kind of going a layer deeper, red, yellow, green, is where are you in reference to kind of how you're showing up in the world? Are you living in a state of to me or by me? And this is a framework developed by the Conscious Leadership Group. So if you go to conscious.is, you'll learn a lot more. They have tons of great resources. And that's where I got a lot of my training and a lot of the things that I tend to bring to the program. So when you're in this to me state, which is not a bad place to be, I will preference and say this again, we're here a lot. This is a natural place to be as a human, so don't kind of look at it as, oh no, I'm constantly in the state, I'm bad, I'm doing anything wrong. We're really just talking about where are you and kind of being able to locate yourself above or below this kind of line that we have here. So when you're in this to me state, life is happening to you. You're switching between being a victim, a villain, or a hero, which we're going to talk about next. You're in the mindset that there's always a problem, something needs fixing, somebody needs blaming. You might know that you're kind of below the line in this. If you're feeling like there's not enough time or money or resources, you'll know you're down here if you're feeling strongly that there's a right and a wrong in the world, or that that's something that's threatening approvals, threatening your security, or threatening your control. Another good sign of being down below the line is if you're really attached to things being serious, like holding things tight, there's no room for play or laughter. That's another sign that you might be kind of living in this consciousness of things are happening to me. And so, yeah, when you're below the line in this to me state, you'll also notice people justifying or rationalizing things, claiming to opinions, getting overwhelmed is a good kind of, I'm kind of naming these as triggers. So kind of the first step is really just starting to notice your triggers and being like, oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I must, where am I? Am I in this state of mind that's happening to me? And then the by me, which is supposed to be, is really a state of life that is living in curiosity and with appreciation, and kind of a mindset is just what is there to learn in the world? And some triggers to know that you might be here are when you think that learning and growing are more important than being right. From a distance, anything and everything can be funny, so kind of loosening that serious. And that everyone and everything in your life is an ally, and that they're here for your growth. So even the things that are hard and pushing you kind of have this view of okay, how's this here to help me? And if you're above the line, you might be just in a constant state of curiosity, in an ability to deeply listen, and kind of question all of your beliefs and really live playfully. So here, an example of this might be, I struggle from insomnia and I have really annoying sleep issues. And so most of the time I'm in this to me point of view. I'm just why, my friends don't have this, this isn't fair. Why did I get born with this? What's wrong with me? I have to fix it. I have to go to the sleep doctor, this and this. And I'm there a lot. And there's tons of good reasons to be there. But every once in a while, I'll notice myself shift to above the line, and I'll ask the question, what is this teaching me? What can I learn from this? What can I get from this? Is it to relax more and just down? Is it, I have more time to read in the middle of the night? Kind of what are the gifts of this situation? So it's really a constant dance of just locating yourself, of just the best leaders that we've seen know where they are. If they're coming into a meeting red, it doesn't mean you can't have that meeting. It just means you have the self-awareness to understand from where you're coming. And then perhaps you can make different decisions. So let's just pause here, and I think I'm going to change my mic because I think it's well. And while I do that, Zach, do you want to do an example of red, yellow, green check-in?
Sure. Yeah, so in this moment, from a webinar standpoint, I was like a little bit yellow because I could hear your mic kind of cutting in and out, and I started to wonder, how's this Blue Jeans doing this? Is this your mic? As you're talking about sort of that by me, to me, I'm like, oh, this is frustrating technology. Why is this happening to us? And then I was like, oh, well, I could just text Hannah and say, when you hand it over to me, switch over mics and let's see if that fixes it. So that's an example of kind of where I'm showing up in the moment right now. Overall, things are going pretty well. So in general, I'm kind of between yellow and light yellow, grello sometimes we call it, which is yellow green, because work is intense right now, but family's healthy and things are overall going okay given the circumstances. Thanks, Anna.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach, and thanks for the feedback on the mic. I hope this is better. Feel free to text me if it's not. Okay, great. So just, I think the most common thing when we kind of talk about this above the line, below the line mindset is people are just like, I want to get above the line. Below the line's bad. How do I get out of here? And we're not going to actually talk about today a lot around how to get out of there and how to shift above the line, because we're hardwired to go below the line. Our brain is programmed to see threat, and it was designed for our survival. But our brains aren't great at telling the difference between a threat of our physical environment and the threat of our ego. And so a lot of times our ego will be threatened, and therefore we'll kind of react in these ways. And so just, again, if you take anything, focus on just locating where you are. And then from there, with that allowing and accepting and kind of knowing, then there's more spaciousness to shift. And that's something, we talk about in our program, and I'm also happy to talk about more. And we will talk about some areas later today. This triangle, the drama triangle, is located below the line. So every one of these pieces that we're going to talk about are kind of at this to me state of mindset of the world. And this is just another tool, kind of another layer deeper of answering the question, where am I? So drama happens everywhere. There's a lot of great things that happen from drama, and there's a lot of things that make everything more difficult through acting out kind of drama at the workplace. Often, when you're kind of in drama, you're playing these three parts: the hero, the victim, and the villain. Sometimes you're very quickly moving between the parts. Sometimes it might be you and a coworker, or kind of doing the triangle dance together. So we'll go into these briefly. Again, this is just an idea to help you figure out where you are, and from there, you can figure out where you want to be. So a hero is seeking temporary relief. They search within themselves or externally to end suffering, but only with a temporary end. So they are also looking for some sort of reward or ability to change in this. So I used to have a really big hero tendency, and I hated it when anyone was upset. I always wanted to make people feel better. But oftentimes it was just a temporary better. It's like, oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. That kind of friend that's like, oh, they're an asshole anyway. Kind of just saying things to just try to make you feel better and make that immediate pain go away, but it doesn't always make the long-term pain go away. So, example at work could just be, instead of really approaching someone who did something sloppy or kind of didn't do great work, you might say, oh, it's okay, I'll just do it. You might spend your Friday afternoon fixing someone's work because you don't want to make them feel bad, and you don't want to kind of approach that conflict. But for every hero that's coming to save the day, there has to be a victim. And so you can't be a hero without making someone else be a victim. And that could be yourself, but oftentimes it's also somebody else. And so victims, it's great being a victim. They see themselves at the effect of people and circumstances and conditions. And so victims often feel disempowered. They avoid creative responsibility. And they really feel like you can't affect change. So the victim, if you're you'll often hear people complaining or arguing why they can't have what they want, whining. I think a lot of kids are really good at the victim area. There's just this fierceness of power. So it could be, for example, right now, a lot of people probably feel a victim from COVID-19. And a lot of people that are really sick, but the people even just like, oh, I have to work from home. I can't go see my friends. Like, it's this kind of like, life is happening to me. I have no control, this powerlessness of lack of responsibility, really. And so the last part is the villain. And the villain focuses on blame. You'll see all of these parts very familiar if you watch most movies. They make for very entertaining movies and a very entertaining life as well. So villains blame themselves or they blame others, and they really try to kind of be right. Like basically villains there's a right and a wrong, and they want to figure out who did something wrong and who's to blame, what caused the problem. And they often feel that they're kind of righteous in their blaming. Some things you might hear for yourself is like, I should work hard. Like that kind of should is often an internal blame. And so this is kind of a dance. In programs, sometimes we have cards that we put on the ground and you actually talk about an issue you're having and you kind of step on the different triangles. We'll send out this deck. There's a great video I linked to here that kind of goes into details around this drama triangle. And then once what we have them do is like really play it up. And for those familiar from the US, the show Jerry Springer, it's kind of like this, really, there's a lot of drama, basically. And if you really play with these roles, you'll start to see the patterns and you start to have more agency over those patterns. Instead of letting them run your life, you can help run your own life by having this awareness. And so on the other side of this, which we won't get too much into yet, is presence. And this is really kind of the opposite. This is the above the line version of the drama triangle. It's kind of seeing everyone as empowered, taking 100% responsibility, and kind of not pressuring people. You'll know you're here if you're kind of asking questions of, I wonder what benefits will come from me from having to work at home, or I wonder how I'm creating the tension in my relationship with my colleague, kind of asking questions that bring in more responsibility. And kind of, you'll know you might hear if you feel playful and you feel creative and energized. Often this is a place where you can get a lot of work done. Okay, so that was kind of locating where you are. We have red, yellow, green. We have below and above the line and the drama triangle. Now I'm going to move into a different topic. Feel free, again, to put any questions as we go along in the chat, and we can get to them at the end as well. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about, and it's a clean agreement. It's one of the simplest things that I think can make some of the most lasting change. And so a clean agreement is who will do what by when. Pretty simple and pretty easy to not do. Even though I practice this, it's amazing how many agreements I make every day that are not clean agreements. And so there's a few key points in terms of breaking down the who will do what by when. Who has to be really specific, and as does by what. Will do what. So the what has to be so specific, you know if it's done or not. So it can't just be like, you know, Hannah will handle the company recruiting. It's like, well, how do I know if I handled the company recruiting? Is it, you know, I posted our applications are open once, or is it I, you know, reached out to X number of companies? Is it X number of companies applied? You know, how do we know what is, and how do we know if I've completed it? And then, but the by when part actually is, you know, often missed too, though that seems simplest. It's like, oh, date. We encourage people to have a date and a time. So I will do it by May 10th at 5 p.m. Because it's really, really easy to just kind of keep pushing these agreements. And this is, conflict comes up when a clean agreement hasn't been made. And this way, if you have a clean agreement, it takes the personal part of it. It's not me attacking, you know, Zach for have not done anything. It's like, oh, here's the clean agreement we made together. This is how I feel it wasn't met. So it's not about our relationship together. It's about this agreement, and we can kind of take the personal part away from it. And so a few kind of tips for creating clean agreements is first, is it realistic? You know, there's a trust here, and it can't just be like, well, we made a clean agreement. It's actually not a clean agreement if you made something that you know the other person won't do. That's kind of actually my point I think I have on here too. Yeah, do you trust the other person? It's like, if I know Zach's not going to, you know, meet with me at 7 a.m. and be on time for a meeting then, because I've worked with him for a couple of years and I know that, it's on me to not make an agreement that involves us meeting at 7 a.m. And so kind of the bilateral part of these agreements. And then that's another important too, is you can't just make a clean agreement is not clean unless both sides have agreed to it. So not all agreements need to be clean. Sometimes you're like, if you're telling your kids they're going to clean the room, or you're telling an employee they have to have something done, that's fine. You can create these types of agreements, but knowing when you want to be clean agreements that are bilateral and both have agreed to it can be a tool for really minimizing conflict that comes up. And so another part of it, which is less obvious and is when you're answering it, because it's bilateral, is saying if you have what I call full body yes, which is basically there's yeses that are people say to just obligatory yeses. There we go. I wasn't sure if I'd find the word there. Of like, yeah, I'll do that, because they don't want to say no because they want to avoid conflict. But if you have what's called a full body yes, every part of you is like, yes, I'm a full yes to this. I'm excited to do it. Whereas it's okay if you have a maybe or a no, you can still agree to do something, but it goes back to that kind of knowing where you are. If I said yes to something I don't want to do, a project, and then I find myself procrastinating and like dragging my feet, and then all of a sudden I'm resenting the person who told me to do it, that's actually on me, because I agreed to do something that wasn't a full yes. And I do this all the time. I've gotten better. All of this, but especially this, is a skill that you practice over time. And you start to notice like, oh, why am I hating this so much? It's like, I didn't really have a yes to it. Or, you know, why is that person who said they'd do this just not doing it? Why is it constantly late? Maybe they didn't have a yes to it and you didn't really check with them as you were making the agreement. So, and then another key part is to renegotiate an agreement. So if I said I'm going to have something by 5 p.m. on Friday, and it's Friday at 9 a.m. and I know there's no way I'm going to get that done, then I should say that. I should say, hey, Zach, I said I'd have this done by Friday at 5 p.m. it's Friday at 9 a.m. I don't think I'm going to have it done. Can we renegotiate? And can I have until Monday at noon? And then we have a conversation about it and kind of start the whole process over again. Or like I said, I'd be there at 8 a.m. and I'm going to be late. I want to like let you know that I'm going to be late. And then talking to the person when you make the agreement around how are we going to enforce it? How do we work together to make sure that we're taking the agreements seriously and it's important to both of us, and what does it look like if we don't meet it? So having those kind of conversations ahead of time are really helpful with clean agreements. So that's kind of number one favorite tool to use along teams, especially now when everything's moving really fast. There's so much unknown. We don't know what the next couple of weeks or months are going to look like. Clean agreements will be a really helpful tool to bring clarity to a really uncertain time. The next quick take here is on listening, which is, my one of my favorite kind of underutilized skills. And I think it's because people think that they're listening a lot. And a lot of times there's actually different types of listening that may or may not be as useful than others. So a few here just to give you an idea is when you're downloading something. There's all types of listening. Some are just more effective than others. So downloading is, you may know it well, which I do, is listening for what you already know. So it's kind of, I don't know if you've seen, there's this cool video online that is people playing basketball and you're watching to count how many times the ball goes and a gorilla walks across the screen. And a lot of people don't see the gorilla because they're just looking for those passes because they said count how many passes. And so downloading, often you can miss really big things because you're only listening for what you want to hear. So I think downloading is really common. And then factual listening is listening for the difference of what you know. So it's like, okay, I know I want to hear the points that are different, but it doesn't work as well as you get into like deep complexity. So it's kind of a step better than downloading, but you still can miss a lot when you're just listening of like what I know versus what I don't know. Empathetic listening is kind of listening with your heart. So you're listening to kind of understand emotions and where that person's coming from, and like if you were in their shoes, how would you see the world through their eyes? And then lastly, there's generative listening. So that's just like totally open and kind of open to the emergence of what will come. There's no agenda. There's no anywhere to be or get in the conversation. You're really just listening for the possibility of the future. And this is what a lot of entrepreneurs are doing and building is, what do they see? How are they listening to the world around them to build something that is needed in the world? And so I think practicing this listening can be really helpful for entrepreneurs. Too fast. And then there's a couple listening filters. Again, this is just a kind of noticing where you are, like how you're listening. So do you listen to then fix? So when someone comes to you and you just want to talk and they're like, here's what you should do. You should, get rid of that investor and raise X amount of money, blah, blah, blah. It's like, they didn't maybe you just wanted to be heard and you wanted to talk, and yet here someone is telling you how to fix all of your problems. Diagnosing is kind of that person that maybe it's just they ask question after question after question and they're trying to kind of figure out. It's kind of like the one step later than fixing. They're trying to kind of diagnose what their hypothesis of the situation might be. Defending, that's probably pretty clear. It's being you listen and then you respond by kind of being defensive to whatever the person just said. So instead of truly listening, you're just there to defend your point. Calming, very relevant to the hero on the drama triangle. That's trying to kind of make someone feel better. Debating, that's again kind of like come in already. The filter you're listening is skepticism. And so that's what's going to come up from the conversation because that's how you're viewing the conversation. And then correcting. So listening for where the person is wrong and wanting to correct. That's a lot of the villain personality and the trauma is this blaming and this right or wrong. And then lastly, there's just kind of the best tips for listening is these three things. What I hear you saying, is that accurate and is there more? It's really hard to just listen and not kind of jump in and not kind of say things. But if you're truly listening, one of the best tools you can do is just say, okay, this is what I heard. And then you're kind of fixing yourself from having any sort of listening filter. If you're saying, this is what I heard, is that right? Is there more? Those three questions can help you avoid using listening filters. Okay, and then the last quick piece by me, and sorry, this is a lot of different content. A lot of what we wanted to do is just kind of give you some tools, and some will work better for others, and we'll follow up with more information. So hopefully I'm not going too fast here. But this is another really quickly kind of easy tool that you can start using today. And it's speaking unarguably. So on the other side of listening is speaking. And one of the best ways to speak unarguably is to say things that can't be argued with, obviously. And the only things that really can't be argued with are a physical sensation you're having, an emotion you're having, or a thought you're having. And so it's really important to frame what you're saying in these ways. So a thought, the most common one is a thought is often said as the truth. You know, like I could say, I'm talking too fast and this is really boring for you. That's not necessarily true. This could be incredibly valuable for a lot of people right now and probably, and who knows. But what is more accurate to say is I'm having the thought that I'm talking too fast, or I'm having the thought that I wonder if anyone has any questions. I could also say I'm noticing a pain that's kind of sharp and throbbing in my left shoulder. That's an inarguable point of view because you can't tell me what I'm feeling or what I'm not feeling in my body. Or I'm having an emotion of joy. Again, you can't tell me what I am or not feeling. So the slides here, I'm making up a story or the thought that crossed my mind. I see a vision of these points here. You can try practicing this with these kind of sentence stems. I have a judgment arising. That's fine. Judgments are great. Just own that it's a judgment. You know, a lot of it is just owning the experience that you're having, and then you can create connection through sharing what's true for you in this moment. And it helps too because our thoughts change. Everything's constantly changing. And so expressing things in these ways, like you can have a thought right now about something that might be different tomorrow. And so it gives more spaciousness for kind of understanding one another and communication. So I'm going to pause there and switch my screen. And Zach has a couple of things to share too. And thank you for that. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. And again, we'll send the deck out afterwards so you'll have these resources.
Thanks so much, Hannah, for great deep dive there onto a bunch of the techniques that we use during program. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about a couple other topics. So I've been speaking a lot to entrepreneurs lately, specifically portfolio companies, companies that we're talking to potentially about joining us, as well as general entrepreneurs in the sustainability space. And during this time where there's a lot going on, some entrepreneurs, there are tons of issues that they're facing where it kind of feels like the world's falling down around them. I'm talking to other entrepreneurs who happen to have businesses that now are really essential to society as we move forward. And for them, it's almost overwhelm of opportunities and knowing which ones to anchor on, which ones to pick. And if I were to put it kind of into two camps, I'm noticing there's a camp of people who tend to be really frozen by what's going on. There's this kind of sense of inaction or I just don't know what to do next. And then there's another camp of what I call running into the fire people, where it's kind of like, oh, this is thrilling. This is when I'm at my best, when there's a lot of urgency, a lot of tension, a lot of drama going on. That's when I feel alive. And for both of those camps, the tools I'm going to talk about next, I think, are really important. For those of you that are energized by what's going on in the world right now, where there's a lot of business opportunity or there's a lot of stress on the business, but you're really putting a lot of energy into that. One of the patterns that I'm seeing, and I think it's combined too with the fact that now our lives and our work are really tightly linked right now. There's this sense of, I'm going to start my day as early as I can, and I'm going to finish my day and then just go straight to bed. And it's all consuming, all about work. And I want to talk about some of the concepts that I like to teach with entrepreneurs around how to stay healthy. So let me share my screen here and go through a couple of things. So the question is, as we work, as we're participating in this kind of interesting blend of our lives and work right now and larger things going on in society, how do we stay healthy? This is one of my favorite diagrams of the constituent parts of staying healthy. This is from Dr. Dan Siegel, who's written a bunch of great books around mindfulness as well as overall health and well-being. And the idea here is that these are some important components. How much time are you spending sleeping, in physical activity, focused time in, meaning time kind of in a state of self-awareness, downtime, which is not sleep, but it's a relaxing time, playtime, and then when we're connecting with others. And often what I find is when entrepreneurs and people in general, but it especially comes out with entrepreneurs, are in stressful times, paying attention to these dimensions of your life and where you're at. Again, no judgment on it. Is it bad or is it good? It's just the awareness of where you're at. It's often what I find is that people, leaders will begin behaving in ways that sometimes even surprising to them. And these dimensions can be really helpful to enable you to stay aware of where you're at. So often when we're in program, I'll use this scale here to help with entrepreneurs and to help them understand, okay, where is their balance lacking? And sometimes that's totally fine. And it's a calculation of, yeah, we're in program, things are stressful. But I think it is, especially now, it's important to do a baseline. So what I would encourage you to do, and again, we'll send this out with a recording, is if you feel like maybe your decisions are surprising you, if you feel frozen in the moment, if you feel energized, but ultimately starting to get exhausted with how hard you're working and pushing, I encourage you to take this survey. On each of these dimensions, ask yourself, where am I at? When you're done with the overview of that and you're done reviewing that, then ask where are the most important places to shift your attention, shift your time to help bring those dimensions up. Again, it's unlikely that you're going to be, all the way pegged to the right-hand side here. Only time in my life was when I was at Rally. We did 6-week sabbaticals when you'd been there 7 years. And on my sabbatical, I basically did everything I could to maximize all of these dimensions. It was kind of frightening. I felt like a completely different person when all these things were on the right compared to, being in the grind of a startup where things can be really shifted to the left. It was a real eye-opener for me about what life is like and just the ability to interact with the world when things are shifted. We know we're not probably going to be able to get all the way on the right-hand side here. What I encourage you to do is identify where you're struggling to maintain balance on these dimensions of health, and then think about actions to improve them. Let me talk just briefly about a little bit more detail. So focus time, that's going to be time where you're really kind of in the zone. So focus time is where, doing activities where it feels like kind of time melts away. Science shows that a certain percent of this, kind of my heuristic here is, except for sleep and diet, obviously, think about how can I get just 15 or 20 minutes of this per day? It can have a huge positive impact. That's sort of like the minimum effective dose. Playtime is where you're, playing with ideas, playing with pets, kids. The idea is it's an activity where you're working together on some shared outcome that's enjoyable. Connected time is when you're connecting with other people. This can be an especially challenging time for that, both in work and in personal life. So thinking about how can you increase the amount of connection that you feel, even though it may be, through electronic means like this. Physical time is physical activity, exercise, walking, running, doing things that get your heart rate up. Time in is awareness of your own thoughts. So some people choose to do meditation. Some people enjoy kind of a quiet walk. This is a time to kind of reflect inwardly on just what's going on inside. Downtime, again, that's where you're relaxing. So this can be, maybe doing a little bit of TV watching. Maybe it's a little bit of reading. It's things that you enjoy where you're in a restful state, but not asleep. Sleep can be really critical in times like this. I know it can be hard to achieve sleep. For me, usually I sleep fairly well, but in the last month or so, my sleep has been pretty choppy. But the idea here is to get, the best quality of sleep that you can. And then diet. One of the heuristics I use here is, in times of stress, imagine that you're diabetic and eat relatively, the same meal a diabetic would. And that could be really powerful to maintain blood sugar and your overall kind of homeostasis. Okay, the next concept that I like is, I want to cover today is, assume you're kind of in a good place, taking care of yourself, or the best place you can be right now. I want to reveal something that our brains do to us constantly. One of the things that's happening right now is there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of shock to the system. So there's going to be issues, both positive and negative, coming up all the time. So for some businesses, they'll skew one way versus the other, but our brains react in very typical and predictable ways when something uncertain or unexpected happens to us. And right now, unfortunately, that's sort of the norm, or the not, is every day is kind of a new unexpected thing. And there's real power in understanding how our brains naturally handle this. This is a body of work from a friend of mine, Christopher Avery, that I think is really powerful. And it's called the responsibility process. Let me go through it really quickly with you. And our brains just naturally do this like I said, every time something unexpected happens. So let's say something comes up. The first thing that our brains naturally attempt to do, but usually it's pretty short-lived, is just deny that it's even there at all. Oh, I'll just ignore that. That didn't exist. That didn't happen. The next place our brains go when the facts or the situation is obvious enough we can't just flat out deny it, is we go into blame. We've asked the question, whose fault is this? Who did this to me? And again, all our brains do this. It's very natural, no judgment here if your brain falls into this pattern. The idea, though, is to be aware of this. And when you're laying blame, go, I'm looking for someone to blame on this. It's just what all of our brains do in this moment. How can I work past this? The next place our brains will go is to justify. Basically, we tell ourselves a story about why what happened. And usually, as kind of Hannah talked about, usually we're kind of looking for that villain victim kind of mindset here. So blame is often taking a villain stance. Who did this to me? Justify can be taking a little bit of that victim stance. Oh, here are the extenuating circumstances. This is why this is happening to me. And again, it's very hard to take appropriate next steps when your brain is trapped in these states. Once we go past justifying and telling that story, then we often shift into this place of shame. Basically, this is self-blame. So now we're putting all of the weight and the judgment on ourselves. We did something wrong. And even more powerfully with shame is that it's not that you just did something wrong. It's this belief that I am fundamentally broken or I'm fundamentally wrong for having this have happened. Again, not a great place at all to take next steps and actions. Then our brains will naturally jump into this place of obligation. This is the place of, I feel like I have to, but I don't want to. So if something goes wrong, we can look at it and go, I don't want to do this, but I feel like I have to do this as a way to repair what just happened. And then when you live in these states long enough, or you don't move out of them, we can get trapped into this place. It feels like the only way out is just quit. I've talked to a few entrepreneurs that their businesses aren't broken, but I can tell they're just tired and they're just done with it. And they're at a place of just saying, I quit, I give up, I can't do this anymore. Again, it's a natural place, this ladder all our brains go to. The question is, how do we escape this? How do we move to a place of taking action where we're not trapped by these natural pitfalls that our brains want to pull us into? And this is what Christopher talks about as taking responsibility. There are three pieces that are important in taking responsibility. The first is intention, knowing that you want to act from this place of responsibility. And a powerful question around that is, in this moment, what do I want? The next is an awareness of yourself. Now that I revealed that your brain naturally goes through this, having the awareness that, my brain does this, oh, cool, I am on this spot in that progression. And playing a game that I like to do, which is called Catch It Faster. So the game here is how fast can you catch yourself naturally going through this progression and then going back to your intention. What do I want in this moment? And then the last part is confront. And often this is the hardest because you can be aware your brain's doing this, know what you want in the next action. And confronting it is facing yourself and asking, okay, now that I know that this is going on in this moment, what's the action that I want to take to move this forward? And this is really powerful for leaders because you can, it's very hard to lead an organization, especially through tumultuous times, if you don't have the skills to break yourself free of the entrapment that our brains are normally in. There's another piece of this, which is once that you see this, it's very easy to see it in other people and often harder to see it in yourself. And you have to be careful about pointing this out, because if you help somebody recognize in a blameful kind of way, oh, you're trapped in obligation, that's a way of moving the conversation to kind of, from your place blame on the fact that all of our brains do this. But an important question as a leader, and one that I like to ask in moments like this is, in this moment, what do you want? Where do you want to go? What is your intention? And that can help people reframe and break out of this. Really important skill if you're working with people in your organization that are struggling with these same kind of notions as they move forward. The next thing I want to talk about is responding to issues. A lot of stuff is going to break right now. A lot of opportunities could present themselves, but they're going to be kind of mysterious and hard to see sometimes. So one of the powerful things when you're responding to issues is finding the root cause, understanding not just at the very top of what happened, but what's going on underneath it. Again, with this last framework, the responsibility framework, the natural place our brain is going to go to is who caused this? And that kind of blame place. So instead of playing the who game, I like to play the why game. Why did this happen? Or what caused this? So if you think about something that's significant that happened in the last week or so, what I encourage you to do is write down maybe one sentence of what happened. Something that was an upset, an issue that you had to work through, something that had some urgency to it. So now that you've identified your kind of upset or the issue that you faced, what I encourage you to do then is to ask, what caused the problem we observed? It's important with issues and problems to talk about what you observed, the factual matter at hand, and then ask what caused that. So for the thing that you wrote down, I encourage you to think about, oh, well, what caused that? And write a sentence or two. We'll kind of go through this quickly, but you can come back to this. And then the key thing here is to keep asking, okay, well, given that thing that you just wrote down, what caused that? And what this will do is let you keep asking these questions to get down to the underlying driver or the underlying cause of what happened. Now, you can take this too far. And if any of you have young kids or have interacted with young kids that are curious about something, and they just keep asking you questions, like I remember when my kids were young, one of them was asking me about the diffraction of light and why it causes the sky to be a certain color. And he just kept asking me questions. And at the very end, the last answer I gave was, if I remember right, that has something to do with quantum mechanics, but I don't remember the details from college. And so you can bottom this out and get to an unhelpful place. So what you want to do is then kind of ladder back up and think about, okay, what caused this that feels like it had the biggest influence and is the most actionable for us to put energy into. Once you've identified that, then it's important to think about the countermeasures. Now that we've identified what is causing this, where can we put focused energy into improving this or altering the situation that we find ourselves in? This is a really, really powerful pattern and skill to get into, like I said, especially in these times where a lot of issues are going to be coming up, is figuring out where to put your energy so that the least amount of energy has the most impact on resolving the issue and helping to prevent the issue from happening again. Really powerful techniques. All right, kind of last slide here, you can see our email addresses. Let me pop out of screen sharing here, and I invite your questions. So let's go back into question mode here. Hannah, did you want to take the question here on clean agreements?
Yeah, I can start and feel free to add anything. One of my thoughts is on the enforcing is just like the agreement is to make it bilateral. And so maybe in this situation where the question was, where would you share more wisdom to enforce the clean agreement? We've been following the who, what, when, but found some difficulty, as people might say, oh, I did not know that, or I forgot. So one thing here, it sounds like as you make them together, write them down. And then there's really no excuse to say, oh, I didn't know that or forgot. It's in writing. Perhaps each, weekly meeting, team meeting you write down all the ingredients made, and then you check in on them on the next week and say, okay, here's our agreements. Where are we at? Do we need to renegotiate anything? And then one point, on the enforcement is maybe you decide as a team what happens if it's not together. You decide what happens if this isn't met. It could be something playful. It could be, okay, what we did one year with our companies who didn't meet their weekly goals is they had to sing karaoke. That's because we wanted to bring play and fun into the meeting. And so it doesn't always have to be like an enforcement, like if you break 3 rules, you're then fired. You can get really creative, and I encourage you to decide what those enforcements are with the people who are creating the agreements. Any other questions? And we'll send out the slides with some links for more information. And as always, if you want to learn more about the program or the work that we do, please reach out and let us know if we can be supportive. Anything else, Zach?
No, just appreciation for everybody who joined us today, and thank you for the work that you're doing. The world needs it right now.
Definitely. All right, stay well.